Welcome to Looking at Lucasfilm, the podcast with a different perspective on the world of Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and all of the other entities that George Lucas, Kathleen Kennedy, and the rest of the team at Lucasfilm have dreamed up over the past 40 years. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and my co-host, the one, the only, Danzy, and I are recording this on Monday, November 25th, 3 days out from Thanksgiving. More importantly, though, for Star Wars fans, we're just 4 days away from a new episode of The Mandalorian. Dan, I got to tell you, I'm 3 episodes in, and I am absolutely loving this Disney Plus series. What's your take on it?
This show is it's glorious. It is Star Wars adrenaline is what it is, and the fact that they have masterfully chosen to release this once a week gets that hype train rebooted every week in such an amazing way. I mean, I think I told you that for the first episode, I woke up without my alarm at 3:30 in the morning, almost in a cold sweat, thinking, "Oh my gosh, I've got to watch this before someone ruins it for me," because I'm such a spoiler phobe. And I love it. And what's even cooler is I'm showing it to my mythology students. We're writing reflective essays on mythology and culture through these episodes. All my classes are booked for next semester and next year because everyone thinks all we're doing is watching The Mandalorian, which that isn't true. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, but it's great. This appointment viewing that they have set up reminds me of the excitement of seeing the original trilogy and waiting for that to happen. But now, instead of waiting 3 years, you just wait 6 days, and boy, they are killing it on every level. Okay,
and now can we assume 3 episodes in we can get a little specific story-wise?
I think yes, because it's all over every social media outlet. Even Jon Favreau's posting it.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah. Though I don't know if you saw just today that evidently somebody from Disney Legal made the mistake of sending out cease and desist to folks who were using the Baby Yoda, yes, for Instagram and that sort of thing. And it's like, oh, pal, come on. This is the thing that's about to make millions upon millions of dollars for the company. In fact,
isn't this doing more better? Isn't more better? Wow, English teacher. Isn't this doing better than Stranger Things, which I think is fascinating? Now, but when we see these reports, does that mean Stranger Things now or when the new seasons drop?
That's an interesting point. Face it, Stranger Things at this point is a cultural phenomenon.
Yes.
So, and Mandalorian is sort of gaining momentum as we go along here. But I love, I don't know if you saw the story that broke over the last 48 hours or so that evidently, in fact, it's 1977 all over again, Dan. It's like people are, where are the Mandalorian toys? And it's
isn't it? Just like the mystery, the box that you can get in 1978 that didn't have anything in it. Yeah.
Well, there you go. But
early
the
bird special.
Thing is, last week, I'm, again, I finally made it to Galaxy's Edge, and we'll talk about that back half of the show. But I'm in the Toydarian toy maker store. And from having, been to Black Spire Outpost that the gimmick of this story is it's as if the toys are made, right there on Batuu. They're hand sewn together. They have that sort of aesthetic. But what they had done is they had taken one of the Yoda little, cloth toys and had put it in, I want to say it was an inverted helmet, and put it up on a high shelf and positioned it in such a way that it looked just like Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian.
Smart.
And honestly, you would have thought that it's like, we're selling new flavors of crack here, folks. Just people like, oh, I want the Baby Yoda doll. And it's like, well, it's not really the Baby Yoda doll, but sure, go ahead, buy it. But I have to admit, I'm so enjoying the style of storytelling on this, that the way it's, the way we're sort of learning about, the title character here, and, between his backstory, which, gets alluded to in flashbacks and that sort of thing as being somewhat tragic, as a child, and, the talking of, how he's actually setting, when there are extra pieces of Beskar or that sort of thing, it's being set aside for the foundling. So he's a bounty hunter, but you're suggesting he's a conflicted bounty hunter. He may, he maybe a guy with a softer side, though. At the same time, I love the fact that he took payment. He left the child. He picked up his next assignment, and that wonderful moment, him in the cockpit of his ship, and he's about to take off, and he goes to hit the control that the Baby Yoda had, unscrewed the knob on, and it was that little quiet moment that the whole second half of the episode turned on.
You see evidence of this throughout, because in the second episode he refers to the child as it.
Yep.
And then suddenly we don't get that pronoun. We get the kid. Now the kid is still not the child, but it's still a step in the right direction. So you get to see his apotheosis when he makes that shift. And I think he when we see these incredible flashbacks to him as one of the foundlings, I think he gets empathy, realizing that this child is no different than him. And then, then we get like a Christopher Nolan Batman thing that Deborah Chow brought us, the way he retrieves Baby Yoda. That is just another level. And I think you mentioned the 3 different episodes. I think the fact that we have different directors and different lenses through which we're able to see this is magnificent. And it is very much presenting itself through the storytelling.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because the very next one that drops this Friday is directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, and who a lot of folks know from the Jurassic World films, but of course is, her dad's Ron, the director of Solo, a Star Wars story. So got to wonder, what sort of conversations those two had before she took on this assignment. Before we step off of The Mandalorian, I have to ask, are you familiar with the John Ford film, The Three Godfathers?
I am not.
Okay. It actually something you might want to seek out for the holiday season. It's a John Wayne film. Again, from directed by John Ford, and that they did lots of great work together, but it's from 1948, and it's really sort of a weird bend on the story of the three magi. It's a Reader's Digest version of the story. It's about these 3 outlaws who are on the run after a bank robbery, but they're out, crossing the desert, and as they cross the desert, they come across this wagon train that's been attacked, and there's this woman in one of the wagons who's dying, a pregnant woman who's dying, and as she's there, she gives birth to the child, but she makes these 3 guys swear that they'll take care of her baby. And the weird thing is, over time, again, you watch these characters that you think of as villains, grow to care for the child and make sacrifices, some pretty profound sacrifices to protect the child. And it was just, the fact that The Mandalorian sort of has that Clint Eastwood spaghetti Western vibe going for it. And they've now revealed this sort of, where the story path seems to be going. It was just sort of like, wow, it's the Three Godfathers.
That's an apt comparison. I'm going to have to track that down.
Yeah, no, definitely worth seeking out. But again, as much as I love how this story is unfolding, I got to tell you that the most recent episode of Star Wars Resistance, I got to tell you, I'm starting to get frustrated with this animated series, Dan, and it's not because that they aren't putting out some amazingly compelling characters and some really fun story ideas, but they face it, they got canceled, and so they're trying to collapse like 4 seasons worth of stories into 2 seasons. And
do we know for sure this was going to be 4 years though? Because I always got the impression that this was only going to be two seasons, because it's in a small time frame and there's a small window to tell a really powerful story.
Well, the interesting thing that I was told, and again, this is from the Disney television side, I didn't necessarily get this from Dave Filoni, but they were always anticipating they'd get 3 seasons, and with the notion of there were potentially places to go for 4. And with the notion of, especially that this was going to drop between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, and sort of help keep people on interested in the franchise. And for example, that's one of the reasons why Poe Dameron is front and center, or at least early on, and comes in and out of the storyline. But just the character that got introduced in this last episode, Captain Doza's wife, Vanessa, I believe her name was.
Yes.
And a great character, wonderful storyline, and she's gone, and likewise, this whole thing of Tam, who's now joined the First Order, but appears to be having second thoughts, and is just, again, the show seemed to be picking up speed. And I guess I'm getting, honestly, that's in a weird sort of way, it's to Star Wars Resistance detriment that The Mandalorian is up and running now, because this is beautifully paced storytelling, and in fact, I love how you notice that thing from it, the title character going from calling the baby Yoda it to the kid, that's something that had to unfold in a logical way to have emotional resonance,
right?
Within the story. And with Star Wars Resistance, I feel like the rock is rolling downhill and it's picking up speed, and it's like, no, slow down. There's some good stories to tell here.
Well, if it helps, I've been living this series with my son who's 6, and he loves it. Every time it's over, so I think. I mean, obviously, it's a different audience than The Mandalorian, which is a much grittier take on Star Wars, but still Star Wars field. Star Wars oxygenated, I guess, might be an interesting way to describe it. So I guess let's just wait and see how they played out, because, and I hadn't heard that about it being potentially 3 seasons, because on what I had heard was that 2 years is all that they ever wanted to do, because they're going on to something else, which will be clear in a couple of weeks.
Okay, well. Sense. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I trust Dave Filoni implicitly.
Right.
And again,
he's not really largely involved in this one. Not really.
Well, remember, he got it up and sort of got it going, and shaped the story direction, and then had to pivot to Mandalorian. But anyway, well, while we're talking about things that are zooming along, did you see just today we got news about I guess the actual running time for Rise of Skywalker?
Right.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think we actually talked about this back in October. There were reports back then that had this J.J. Abrams films clocking in at 2 hours and 35 minutes, which would have made it, I guess, the longest Star Wars film. But just today, I guess JB did an interview with EW Live, and he said at this point, give or take a couple of minutes of credits at the end, Rise of Skywalker is going to be 2 hours and 21 minutes. So
they said it's done, right? They said that he's done with working on it. Is that true?
That's what I'm hearing. Right. So what do you think? Was it the early? Because remember, didn't we get that information from like exhibitors?
I think that was what it was originally being touted as, but they also I don't think we're even done with all the cuts and all the trims and all the window dressing. So you never know with these things. I feel like Rogue One was kind of like this too, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so.
It's going to be interesting, and like you said, something who knows how much the credits will be, and in the end, will it be the first after credit scene where we get to see Howard the Duck? Hard to say.
You and Howard the Duck.
I promise I won't do any duck puns.
Okay, by the way, I heard from so many people about it's like, wow, it's like that guy in the what is it? The Hoopty Review who does the endless series of bear jokes. It was like, nobody knew there were that many duck related jokes on the planet. It was very impressive.
I'm flattered. Thank you.
Okay. Now to duck back for a second to, again, the Disney Plus, the new subscription streaming service.
Sure.
I know Star Wars fans are really enjoying The Mandalorian, but if they're not also watching Leslie Iwerk's excellent documentary series, The Imagineering Story, they are really missing out. Did you get to catch this last episode 3, The Midas Touch?
I haven't seen it yet, but based on what you and I talked about earlier in the week, oh boy, I need to do it as soon as we're done recording.
Well, it's just, what's great about it is this picks up in the part of the story. It's roughly 1984 after Epcot opens, and that Disney's been green-mailed, and so who comes through the door? Michael Eisner and Frank Wells, and it talks about how Frank and Michael think Disneyland is actually cooler than the Imagineers do. It's like, oh, we got to put cool stuff in this, and what's cooler, at that point than George Lucas and the Star Wars films, and so now you suddenly get into this amazing chunk of the documentary where they show the actual construction of Star Tours. You get to see them, they carve a hole in the roof of the old Adventures Through Inner Space building, and they're using a crane to lower in 4 of these 26,000-pound cars, the simulator cabins, and even better, they actually have this amazing piece of video of Anthony Daniels in the recording booth, recording the spiel for what was then known. In fact, he actually tells people, "Welcome to Star Rides," because and God, as terrible as that name what it is, Dan, the first name for the ride was even worse, Starbus.
That's no good.
So I get, but anyway, I mean, they go all the way through the thing. You get to see George and Michael cutting the ribbon for Star Tours with a lightsaber. You get to see the line that goes all the way down Main Street for the 60-hour party. And for those of you who are also Indiana Jones fans, they take you inside the Indiana Jones adventure. You get to see that ride under construction. And speaking of which, did you see the news coming out from Disneyland that in 2020 the Indiana Jones adventure out there is getting a massive new update, lots of new effects and that sort of thing?
Is it really? No, I didn't know that. Oh, that's great news. Wow.
So, downside is it means a lot of summer walking by, a closed off temple, but later in the year could be very, very cool.
Do we have any hints about what that might mean, or is it too early?
Well, the weird thing is they've actually already done an update. I want to say in the last 3 to 4 years where, for example, that scene where you have looked in the eyes of Mara. They updated the projection effect there, and they also brought in a spectacular new animatronic snake in midway through the attraction. But my understanding is the part of the ride where with the blow darts, the effect, that's where honestly the money ran out. They were running and gunning to get the thing open in 94, 95, and it's just sort of like, we don't have money, we need to spend it in places where people will really appreciate it, and the rolling rock and all that, but it looks like they're going to revisit that, finally deliver on that portion of the attraction, and try to do some updating of the main chamber. So
because the bug effect doesn't even really work too much anymore now. I don't.
Yeah. In fact, those folks who actually got to see Indiana Jones in operation during its first summer, did you ever hear about the collapsing ceiling effect?
Oh, I remember it very well. I thought it was groundbreaking. I loved it.
It was. But again, the whole conceit of it was that, what is it? They had a flash freezer. And in fact, it was actually pretty ingenious. The notion is that in the ceiling, they had a flash freezer. And I want to say every 90 seconds, they could create a solid piece of ice that they then would drop directly in front of you. So you'd think, oh my God, the ceiling's collapsing. But the cool thing was that it would land on a drain that was heated. So the ice, was superheated, by the way. So the ice would immediately melt. It was sort of the self-control, contained system. that and every 90 seconds a new chunk of ceiling would fall out. But I think, as happens with, all attractions, whenever the Imagineers hand it off to ops, it's just sort of like, yeah, that's hard to maintain and that's expensive and we'll be turning that off. And that's what happened there. So, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, what comes, what gets added during this next update. But
I'm thrilled. I hope they take some of the great indie stuff from the Great Movie Ride and move that over just to have it.
That's an excellent idea
because
that's
to get the arc.
So, well, speaking of which, while we're talking about theme park things, just this past week at the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, we had IAAPA's Attraction Expo. And at that event, it was announced that Star Wars Galaxy's Edge has received 2 Theo Awards. These are, for those listeners who don't know, this is the equivalent of an Academy Award for the themed entertainment business. And but they received 2 awards for outstanding achievement. And what was especially cool is that they brought the creative team behind Galaxy's Edge into panel. And I don't know if you heard about, heard anything about this, Dan?
No, I haven't.
Okay, at one point, Margaret Carrison, who's the managing story editor for Walt Disney Imagineering, as part of the panel, was quoted as saying, "Believe me, it's not over. We are looking into the future of storytelling for Galaxy's Edge above and beyond what you currently see today. So this is something that's ongoing, something that's evolving, and something that we're very excited about." And I have to tell you, having just been in there, this past week, remember how there were initially some folks grumbling about, there aren't enough Star Wars characters in here. Where are the droids? That sort of thing. When I was I was in the merchant marketplace section, Dan. I swear I must have bumped into Chewbacca 5 different times. Seriously, it was like being back here in New Hampshire and running into presidential candidates. This particularly this time of year. So I don't know what Chewbacca's running for, but he is really putting in the face time. On the other hand, Scott Trowbridge, who's the portfolio creative executive for Imagineering, he flat out said, when it comes to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, we have lots of stories yet to tell, and they're still coming.
I wonder if that's that means here in the States or what they're planning for Paris, or maybe it's all of it.
Well, as I understand it, the plans for Paris are evolving. I don't want to get too specific about that because I had a friend share some stuff in confidence, but it looks like definitely Rise of the Resistance is, it has been slotted for there. Likewise, Oga's Cantina. But, there seem to be some other things in play here.
So maybe we'll table that and come back. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to definitely swing back. Speaking of great stories, I have to tell you, and again, listen to this is an actual book I am holding in my hand. I picked it up today. This is Paul Hirsch's memoirs, and the reason it caught my attention, I'm constantly looking for fodder for this podcast, Dan, and it was literally this book sitting sideways on a shelf with this title that caught my eye, and it was like, "A long time ago in a cutting room far, far away."
Great title.
And it's just like, the subtitle is "My 50 Years Editing Hollywood Hits, Star Wars, Carrie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Mission Impossible, and More." And I apologize, folks. I only literally picked up this book today and was sort of frantically reading it out ahead of, Dan and I recording the show tonight. And there are so many great stories here. I mean, for example, this is Paul talking about arriving. George Lucas and his wife Marcia were in the process of editing Star Wars, A New Hope, but they knew they needed help, so they invited Paul to come up to the Bay Area. So he said, we arrived on a Saturday, but everyone was at work. So I sat down to look over George's shoulder as he worked on the opening of the picture. As they ran the first reel, there was a cut of a young woman in a long white dress with buns over her ears. This was my first view of Princess Leia. Carrie Fisher wasn't what you expect from a conventional movie star princess, but George and Marcia, who was instrumental in the casting, liked her spunk. They knew they needed an actress who could credibly stand toe-to-toe with Darth Vader. Carrie became much beloved as the princess. We kept running the reel. Vader made his entrance, and I could feel the power of the moment. The combination of his build, his carriage, the costume with its mask and Japanese-influenced helmet, and the sound of his breathing apparatus, as well as the low camera angle that emphasized his massive dimensions. This was exciting. This was going to be great. But at the same time, the weird thing is, so here, that's Marcia and George are asking for Paul's help to find the movie that's in all the footage, that they've cobbled together, and so they start with the Ben's cave scene. And so where it gets interesting is that as they're watching the initial cut of it, there's something about that it began to bother him. And so Paul turns to George and says, I've been thinking there's something wrong with the scene. And George says, well, what is that? And it's like, well, as it stands now, Leah's message plays at the beginning of the scene. Then Luke and Ben sit and talk about the Clone Wars and how Ben knew Luke's father. He gets up and gives him a lightsaber, and only after that, Ben announces that Luke must accompany him to rescue Leia. And so George is like, yeah, so? Says, well, it's as if they've just heard this awful news from her, and they don't react. The world is on fire, and they're just sitting there talking. And George's like, I see what you mean. So can't we restructure it so they get all this talk about the old days out of the way before they play the message? Then as soon as they hear it, they can react. And so it was Paul who, suggested that sort of, swapping the way the footage had initially been shot, which then led to, the scene as we know it today. Now, what's especially interesting about this is that he was pretty brutal. Paul, when he got in the editing bay, he was talking about, for example, the famous Tashi power station scene with Biggs. Right. And well, first of all, he kept talking about how from an editing point of view, it was a nightmare because Biggs had a costume with a cape. And I guess whoever was handling continuity for that scene, every time you tried to cut the scene together, Biggs had thrown his cape over a different shoulder. And it was like, I can't make this work.
Oh my
but more to
goodness.
the point, there was all this talking and, and information that was shared better at different places in the movie. And in the end, Paul pointed out, it's like, look, we just saw R2D2 and C3PO, blast out of, in that escape pod. And wouldn't, the audience is definitely hooked into that story. Wouldn't it make more sense just to drop this and go straight to C3PO and R2D2? And so in the end, for those of you who, have been moaning for years about the cut scenes from Star Wars and the Tashi Power, station scene, this is Paul. It's like, look, we can tell this story faster. We can tell this story with more economy. But some of the other stuff that he had a handle in is just, listen to this, Dan. You're absolutely going to love this part. Okay, so that they're talking now. George and Paul are talking about the lightsabers, and George turns to. This is how early in the process Paul's involved. By the way, any thoughts on the colors? I was thinking of making Luke's sword red and Vader's blue. And Paul responded, actually, I do. And he hearkened back to my studies in art history. In Renaissance painting, the generally accepted Christian iconography is that always painted Jesus and Mary in red and blue, with red representing earthly and blue the celestial. So actually, I think it would be better to have Vader's be the red sword and Luke's the blue. Had you ever heard that before, Dan?
No, and this is the kind of stuff that fascinates me as an English teacher, because we talk about symbols and color, and color is such a powerful motif in literature. So this particular entry is endlessly fascinating to me.
Oh, and again, this is why I cannot recommend enough. A long time ago in a cutting room far, far away, it talks about how smart George was about the movie he was making. For example, they talk here about the casting of Leia, and it's like George told me that he had calculated that he could approach the casting of the princess in one of two ways. He could have cast a woman who would have appealed more to the Playboy reading male audience, or he could go younger and try for the prepubescent audience. He chose the latter. And this is George talking about the film as they're cutting it together in 76 thereabouts. He's like, look, this is basically a Disney film. And those movies always make $16 million. You can look it up. This picture is going to cost about $10 million, so it probably won't turn a profit. But we should be able to make some money if we sell some toys based on the characters. So...
Well, I wonder how that's going to turn out.
I wonder how that's going to turn out as well. But the other thing, frankly, that in this, I wanted to close out talking about this book with this story, but it's Paul J. Abrams actually brings Paul in about 2 and 3 months before the Force Awakens is released to theaters, and it's like, you cut the original New Hope. I want you to, take a look at this and see if you have any notes. And the interesting thing is, because he helped out, he wound up getting invited along with his daughter to the opening of The Force Awakens in Hollywood. And, so he's there with his daughter, Gina, and he says, I wound up seated in the same theater as George. At the end of the picture, I managed to catch up with him as leaving. And he says, I said to him, boy, that was something, wasn't it? Compared to this, we were just playing with model airplanes on string. And George says, yes, and thank you. And Paul says, thank you for what? And he says, for my career. And, and then he said again, you were the last guy standing. You saved my picture.
Wow.
So, I mean, I just, there's something like that he could be that gracious that far after the fact, but recognizing that they spent eight solid months, turning all of that raw footage into the film that we know and love today.
That's so powerful. You are very, very beautifully selling this book.
So no, and it's trust me, folks, that there's equally good stories in here about John Hughes movies like Plane, Trains, and Automobile or Ferris Bueller. But seriously, you've got a Star Wars history buff on your hands, that you need to get something for this Christmas. This is the book. Go get that. And speaking of shopping, okay, so I have been to the Bazaar at Black Sparrow Outpost. I have drunk the green and blue milk. I have piloted, rather poorly, I might add, the Millennium Falcon. And when we get back from this commercial break, Dan and I are going to talk about my initial experience during my very first visit to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Psst, healthcare pros, word's out, and it's too good to keep quiet. Look, LinkedIn is revolutionizing job hunting, making it possible to search by specialty, shift preference, and salary. Endless scrolling is out. Whether it's a mental health therapist or dental hygienist, finding the perfect role is faster and easier than ever. Head to linkedin.com/healthcare and start your search today.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana lets you buy your next car on your terms. Explore a massive inventory online, filter for what matters, and find your perfect match. Then choose delivery to your home or pick it up at one of Carvana's iconic car vending machines. Every car also comes with a 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can make sure it's the right fit. Buy your car on Carvana. Delivery or pickup fees may apply. Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
Carvana.
And we're back. Okay, so before we get started here, again, we've been talking, Dan and I have been talking about The Mandalorian and its huge success right out of the box. There's genuine anticipation building for Rise of Skywalker at this point. By the way, you saw that new ad that they have with the scene on the Star Destroyer?
I didn't. I know it's there, and I purposely avoided it because I don't want to know.
Okay, then
I'll turn off my headphones for about a minute if you want to talk about it.
No. I'm going to be fair. Again, I have to admit, I admire the fact that you're able to do this. I'm on the other hand, I'm a pig with truffles. Every time another one of these trailers opens, I'm on it like the Zapruder film, going through individual frames. And no, there's some images in this new trailer that, that was, just, that's it. Take my money now. I want to see this movie. The dopamine that is released with the anticipation is on full gear for me all the time. So that's my favorite part, the anticipation. Well, that's again, cannot wait to hear what you have to say about the finished product. And we're basically only a month out at this point. I know, just a couple of shows left, and we're going to be talking about this thing. Well, now, speaking of which, though, now you would think with The Mandalorian, the success right out of the box, and again, anticipation building for Rise of Skywalker, this should be a time of celebration for Kathleen Kennedy. And yet, this poor woman is now getting stories like the one that ran in the Hollywood Reporter 5 days ago. And let me say right up front that the woman who wrote the piece, Kim Masters, I've worked with Kim. She's a killer reporter. She wrote, one of the more definitive books about the Disney company. In fact, I wish it had gone with the original title, which was The Rise of Michael Eisner and the Fall of Everybody Else. So, great respect for her as a reporter, and, helped her with, a bunch of stories in the past. So I'm not faulting her reporting in the slightest. I know that if she's putting this stuff out, somebody at the studio has given this to her. But I have to admit, I'm not thrilled with an article that stresses that Kathleen Kennedy is 66 years old, and that somehow we're supposed to read between like, well, that she's old, she's out of touch, and this is why they had to reshoot so much of Solo, Star Wars story, or all the work they had to do on Rogue One, and it's just sort of like, it's like, no, wait a minute, she's 66, Bob Iger is 68. Alan Horn, the head of Disney Studios, is 76. George Lucas, 75. Steven Spielberg, who Kathleen and her husband worked for years over at Amblin, is 72. So, Dan, I don't get how it is that when a woman's 66, she's old and out of touch. But Bob Iger, who's 68, and just did this, multi-billion-dollar deal with Fox and just launched, Disney Plus, the subscription streaming service. I mean, he's at the height of his powers, but he's 2 years older. Right. Does that seem fair to you? No, it's sexist. It's of course sexist thinking, and it doesn't make any sense to me. I have never understood the vitriol that is aimed towards Kathleen Kennedy. I think she is wonderful. Mm-hmm. I think she has injected life and excitement into Star Wars that we hadn't seen in a very, very, very long time. I mean, when George was running the show at the end, for all of his amazing things that he did, all we were getting were parodies from Family Guy and things like that, and Robot Chicken, which is fine. But that doesn't advance the narrative and the mythology. That's what Kathleen Kennedy has done. And for her to be on a hot seat, even as a casual conversation, I have a very hard time believing that. And I hope that she stays for as long as possible, because I think she's doing a heck of a job. I mean, you can't control
the whims and the caprice of Hollywood and the different talents. I mean, she's working with a ton of different people. And yes, I'm aware that Marvel has a formula that is gold, and they're printing money with Tony Stark on it. I get that. But, one size doesn't fit all. Different things work different from a certain point of view, right? Let's take the Star Wars thing. And I think it's ridiculous too. I think it's crazy.
Well, I have to agree. And it kind of breaks my heart she was quoted recently in the Rolling Stone as saying, what happens in the future and how long and how much longer I get to do this? I don't know. I'm looking at all of that. So it's just sort of like, come on, just,
I mean, the push button thing is, let's have Favreau and Filoni do it. Well, sure, fine. But come on, we've had 3 episodes of The Mandalorian. It's breathtakingly wonderful and glorious. But let's just take a deep breath and just enjoy.
Yeah, I know. I agree. And speaking of taking a deep breath, I have to admit, as I came into Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, I went in this past Tuesday.
Can I just jump in and say I have been dying to hear this? I can, and this everyone listening to this, it's my first time finding out what Jim thought too. I cannot wait.
Well, I have to admit, I loved the sort of stage setting, the fact that you came through this tunnel that just jogged a bit to the right. So you didn't need, it wasn't immediately revealed to you. You sort of, the story unfolded in front of you. I also loved the detailing of, as you look to the sides of the caverns, it clearly had been carved out with some sort of, laser cannon or that sort of thing. In fact, as I understand it, that's also a conceit that runs through the extended queue of Rise of the Resistance. You're going through this ruin that has been, carved away to create bigger spaces and that sort of thing. So, the details were all killer. I mean, I love the audio profile. In fact, when you've been to the land multiple times now, Dan, on both coasts, did the TIE fighter fly over while you were there?
No, it did not.
Well, that's the thing. We were in the marketplace, and they did this amazing. We're sitting down for lunch, and suddenly you hear a TIE fighter fly over, but not just fly over. You hear, it's done with the Doppler effect, so you can literally, your ears are tracking this thing as it flies overhead. And
that's pretty fantastic.
I have to wonder, have you seen the photos? Well, again, you're being good. Out ahead of the December 5th opening of Rise of the Resistance.
You're talking about the drones, right?
Yeah,
I've seen stills. I haven't seen actual video, but I've seen stills, and I'm pretty spellbound by it.
I wonder if the audio that I heard that day was a test for, what they're going to do that night when they do the opening and have the TIE fighter and the X-wing fly over.
Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be cool. That's
like the understatement of the year. My goodness.
Yeah. But yeah, now coming through the Rise of the Resistance side, you had your Red Wing, your A-Wing, your X-Wing, and I gotta say, Horticulture did an amazing job. It looks like it's been there forever.
Yes.
And definitely had those color tones of like Tatooine. So, and again, in fact, I remember getting to talk with Dennis Chang. Is that the name?
Doug Chang.
About how they were trying to get that those structures that were very reminiscent of Jabba's palace. That there's sort of a squashed cylinder that when you see it. It's part of the Star Wars universe. But they did such a nice job with, the sort of making the used future of the films practical.
Yes.
And
realistic.
Well, yeah, that's it exactly. In fact, that, for example, our good friend Angela Ragno, served as Sherpa. She had been in there, I want to say almost 10 times at this point. She's like, let me show you, let me take you the right way. And so, she did a beautiful job of bringing us up to just the right spot to have the Millennium Falcon, reveal itself.
How did you feel when you first saw it? And you've heard about it forever.
I have to admit, I didn't do the fanboy weeping thing, but it was just sort of like, wow, that is genuinely cool. Now, mind you, I do apologize. We were only able to do this during the day, and Angela kept going over and over again about, this is great, but you have to come back at night. They do such a spectacular job with the way this land is lit that, you're just getting half the story coming in here during the day. And I know when you were out at D23, you used to run over and close the Anaheim version down each night, didn't you? Or
oh yeah, because seeing it at night is spectacular.
Mm-hmm. And all right, well, I'll have to do that. The next time.
It's your homework.
Yep, there we go. And then, we got lucky. We were there on a day. I mean, mind you, it's, I don't know where all these stories about, oh my God, there were no crowds in Galaxy City. Again, we were there on a Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and this place was not packed, but busy. Yeah. In fact, I cannot even imagine what this is going to be like come the Thanksgiving Day weekend.
I know. Or when Rise of the Resistance opens, I'll tell you, because I'm going to be there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we start into the queue for Millennium Falcon, and it's a 50-minute long experience, but compared to folks who waited 3 and 4 hours to get to ride it, I have no complaints. In fact, I really enjoyed a lot of the announcements. Hondo berating his staff and that sort of thing. And
an amazing animatronic.
Yeah, no. It's a beautiful thing. They do a nice job, and I particularly enjoyed that moment where the Falcon sort of flew into place, and and again that was a wonderful bait and switch from you had seen it outside and they moved it, so there was never a well, it's clearly a fake. I'm not entering where the Falcon was. It's like, they've moved it. Well, okay. No, I'm not sure how I get on board this thing. Now that said, and I want to stress here, I'm a 6-year-old guy who doesn't game. And Angela did a superb job. She got Nancy and I set up to be the pilots of the Millennium Falcon. So I was, and again, it was one of these things where I wanted Nancy to have the light speed experience, because again, she has to put up with me. So it's crucial. You have a good time. So she was the one who was the main pilot and did the light speed and the up and down control, and I was the left right control. And I gotta tell you, Dan, I didn't necessarily enjoy piloting the Millennium Falcon, but
it's stressful, isn't it?
It is. And more to the point, there are 4 people seated behind you whose enjoyment of this experience depends on you doing a good job. And I'm a guy who never mastered Pong.
Boy.
No hand-eye control whatsoever. All right.
Well,
so
I can empathize with that, because the first time I flew it, I kept thinking, I waited my whole life to pilot this thing. I don't want to screw it up. And then you're realizing people behind you are watching. You feel like people are watching, but really they're looking at the screen, and they're all around you and things like that. So I totally get that. That's why I said that being the engineer might be my favorite thing, because you get in the very back. You don't have to worry about anything. You just push a couple of buttons, and you can just watch the fun. So that would be something I would suggest the next time you try it. But putting it to light speed, pretty special.
No, I agree. I agree, and Nancy definitely got a kick out of that, and I was happy to see that.
Now, I want to say, I mean, I love it, but I don't think it's anything near as cool as the Flight of the Banshee. I don't even think it's in the same atmosphere. Did you feel like you were looking at a screen? Because to me, I even though it's well done, I still can feel like I'm looking at a screen. Whereas with Avatar, I feel like, no, I'm there. I'm in Pandora.
Yeah, I have to admit, again, I'm going to have to go back and do Millennium Falcon, because to be honest, I was a terrible backseat driver. I mean, poor Nancy, I kept, I was doing my left and right thing, but at the same time barking at her about up, down, because again, we were taking out, and
you were that guy.
Oh God, I was the worst. Just especially as we're leaving Black Spire Outpost, and we're managed to hit every one of the spires. In fact, I think we were only 25% successful on our mission.
Oh boy.
In fact, we were, a Hondo should have sought me out and slapped me. But again, loved the march out, through even more of the theme space. I mean, overall, I think they did a brilliant job. And the fact that, here's this amazing ride mechanism with 7 different pods, continuously rotating 3 different stations, and you have no idea any of that physical setup is there. All you know is you walk down that tunnel, and there you are. You're on the Millennium Falcon.
The interior is exquisite and just something that you just can't get enough of. And
speaking of which, when you're hanging out in that space waiting for your call, and you get to sit there with the holo chest thing. That is pretty special. They did a super job.
It's magnificent. It's magnificent. You got to check out my videos that I did when I was there for the opening.
I will do that. Now, conversely, again, when you look at the Millennium Falcon, you can see the years of research that went into it. That it's successful design. It's in spite of my own issues with I think I would have preferred a more passive experience like Star Tours, watching the adventure unfold rather than being. But I think that's more generational. I think that's more my problem than what Imagineering did. On the other hand, the Blue Milk, I got to tell you, Dan, I've been following this since they cut the check, for Lucasfilm. The whole notion of, wow, they're going to do a Harry Potter like detailed land, and then their butterbeer is going to be Blue Milk, and and thank God I only waited like 5 minutes to get I got a glass of the green, I got a glass of the blue, and and I should have known something when the attendant was looked at my my elderly face and said, "Do you want the rum?" Because now you can get your Blue Milk and Green Milk with for $7 more with a shot of rum in it. And I thought, no, I want to try it the way that God intended Blue Milk to be consumed.
That's right. So which one did you like better?
I didn't like either of them. It was like, it was one of these things like this. This is what after months and months and months in the Disney test kitchen.
They're not great. I prefer the blue.
Yeah.
But it's I mean, if butterbeer is a standard, it's not close to that, unfortunately. I hope that they revisit it to some degree, because I've never heard anyone rave about it.
Yeah, I have to admit, because right now, not to be rude here, but for me, Blue Milk and Green Milk is one and done. I'm not going to queue up for that again.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I do prefer the blue, I will say.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's like saying I enjoy drinking this flavor of house paint. But again,
So please stop mincing words and just be honest. How do you really
I'm
feel?
Sorry. I've been waiting for Blue Milk, since 1977.
No, I agree. I totally agree.
On the other hand,
maybe they need to make it actual dairy. I don't know. And
see, but again, that's the whole decision tree. There is, what do you do with, what do you do with the kid who wants to have Blue Milk but is lactose intolerant?
Right.
You can't deny them that experience.
Fair.
On the other hand, went to Ronto's Roasters. That was great.
Very tasty. Yep.
Very tasty. Like the presentation. Now, mind you, I think I talked about this with Len. I was just trying to have sort of a Galaxy's Edge experience, and there was the menu board, and so it's like, okay, so I'll have the Tatooine Sunset and the Surly Sarlacc, I guess it was called, and accidentally ordered an alcoholic beverage, which was not what I was intending, but it just sort of like the way the menu board was set up. It's like, okay, so these 2 or actually 3 beverages are sitting side by side. I thought, I would have assumed that the alcoholic beverages would have been, had their own display of that sort of thing. But that I think that's more on me than them,
Sure.
But I can't go. And we sat outside the restaurant in the outdoor cafe area, and again, I got to watch, Chewbacca walk around and interact with folks, and that was great fun. And that this is also the sort of elevated porch area where you could look out, and you have that really spectacular view of the Millennium Falcon from above. And again, it was just hard not to be impressed with the level of detail and the obvious care that had gone into it. And also enjoyed making my way through the Merchants Market area. And I think, again, we talked earlier in the show about, the really smart thing that the Toydarian toy maker had done with the Yoda, the handmade Yoda dolls. And again, Nancy and I are such suckers. We were in the which store was that? The one with the animals.
Like the critter. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the name.
Critters, or the creature stall. And
yeah, it's creature stall.
We came within inches of springing for a Lothcat. But I've got the plush Lothcat that the folks at Lucasfilm were nice enough to send me a year or so back, and it's
right.
like that the hard plastic one that meows and that sort of thing. It's nice, but it's not as nice as the plush one.
That whole area, the marketplace is just wonderful. Mm-hmm. I can't think. I need a thesaurus to come up with more superlatives to describe some of these things.
They did. I mean,
I love that atmosphere so much.
And absolutely,
the stuff is unique.
You can see all of the field work that they did, all of the trips to Morocco to get the sense of the real space and what makes that place come to life. So now I have to.
Did you go on the docks, the Dock Ondars?
We got in there, and that was the. In fact, we got in there. We got into the droid depot, and in both cases, they were, and again, to remember, that's the narrative that's out there for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Oh, there's nobody there. There were no crowd. That it was really shoulder to shoulder in both spaces.
Oh, that's good to hear.
And again, I'm happy for them from a retail point of view, but on the other hand, from a walking around and eyeballing things, it wasn't quite as successful. I enjoyed both spaces, but at the same time, after a while, it's like, I'm going to be outside because, it's tough to shop when people are like, ooh, what's that? What's this? What's that?
Yes.
But did those, but didn't get into Oga's Cantina, didn't get into Docking Bay 7, or for that matter, Savvy Salvage.
Oh, yeah, which you couldn't do unless you got a reservation anyway.
Well, there you go. And I just figured better to save this for when Rise of the Resistance is open, and and more to the point, to go back and do the nighttime experience. So, because again, Angela just raved about that. So I guess I have to say, Dan, I liked what I saw. I thought it was good. I thought it was solid. A couple of things caught my attention. For example, we were walking back out, headed toward Grand Avenue, and literally I looked down at one point, and the pavement below my foot had cracked and separated. In fact, it was loose underfoot, which again, sort of speaks volumes about, when the concrete was poured and under what conditions it was poured. And
sure.
But yeah, again, this is the first year, and that's, and more to the point, this was just right by where Rise of the Resistance is the queue area for that. And I'm sure Disney noticed, and I'm sure they're going to fix it, because shortly the entire world is going to be standing in that line. And they're not going to want people tripping over loose pavement or that sort of thing.
No.
Also,
I'm glad you got to finally experience.
I'm glad I got to finally experience as well. I understand why the folks at IAPA went out of their way to recognize what had been done with Black Spire Outpost. Recognizing the outstanding work there. More to the point, when we were driving into the studios, Got to tell you, the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser Hotel is really coming along. In fact, I made some phone calls, and they are definitely on track for an late 2020 opening, but that's going to be soft. That's going to be, testing with cast members and that sort of thing, with the idea
Does that
that
mean
it will
December, basically?
Well,
hard to say,
that's. I think they're going to try to get. I was hearing as early as summer of 2020, but I want to stress here that summer of 2020 was about getting cast members in there, because remember, this is a hotel resort where it's basically modeled after the cruise line plan. That you have a 2 and 3 day long experience. And so to make sure that all of the nuts and bolts work, that, as I understand it, they're going to do, bring a bunch of carefully selected cast members in who are going to sign non-disclosures the size of phone books, have them do the experience, then do a lot of after action groups, the survey folks, and shut down for about 2 and 3 weeks to sort of retool, finesse the scenarios. And then just the idea of putting 2 and 3 test groups through before the first set of paying customers actually come through the door.
And we got to get the media in there too. Come on.
And that you're not wrong. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they actually go about this. But so just anticipate, folks, a certain level of frustration, because you're going to know there's people in that building and that they're having this amazing Star Wars adventure, but you can't get in yet. But as Dan has pointed out, that there's a certain amount of virtue in waiting, and showing self-control. And I seriously, you are not watching the Skywalker trailers.
No, I watched the trailer that was on Monday Night Football was the last thing I saw. I haven't watched any of the clips. I didn't watch what JJ released. No, I just don't want to. I want to. The thing I always refer to, and it's a bit of a short shelf life, but when in the Last Jedi trailer, they show a powerful scene where Kylo Ren appears like he's going to blast General Leia, his mother, out of the spaceship. And then I knew that moment of narrative, that moment of pathos was going to happen in the movie. So when it happened in the movie, the first time I saw it, as much as it moved me, it was nowhere near the level that it could have been or should have been had it been the first time. So I want that first cinema experience to be something that moves me like no other.
I get it. I have to admire your self-control. I will tell you, though, however, that I was the kid that as of October, my mother would be hiding Christmas presents, and whenever she would leave the house, I trashed the place. I was in closets, I was under beds, I was in the attic. I was determined to find this stuff. So I have absolutely no self-control when it comes to secrets, and I have to know things in advance. So this is
my wife will literally come home from shopping, and I'll say, "Please don't tell me where you went. I don't want to know where you went." And she's like, and she'll kind of roll her eyes. Okay. I'm sort of extreme the other way.
Well, no, I admire this. I genuinely admire this. So, well, anyway, folks, if you're looking for other admirable material, particularly within the Star Wars sphere, to listen to enjoy, Dan has this plethora of podcasts that are well worth going out of your way to listen to. Run us through the gamut, Mr. Zehr.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Coffee with Kenobi, of course, every week is your spoiler-free place for Star Wars discussion, analysis, and rhetoric. We want to make you think. We want to make you laugh. And, of course, right now, every week's show is going to be a detailed review of The Mandalorian. I have a rotating chair of co-hosts that join me as we break down The Mandalorian and what it means for the Star Wars mythology overall. And if you really like hearing what I have to say, I have a Patreon page. Coffee with Kenobi has a Patreon page where we have a weekly podcast called CWK Pullover, hosted by myself, Tom Gross, and Corey Kleber. We look at pop culture behind the scenes of the podcast, Star Wars, Marvel, theme parks, all kinds of goodies.
Well, worth checking out. On the other hand, over here at Jim Hill Media, we got Disney Dish, which I do with Lentessa, which is about the Disney theme parks. We have Fine Tuning, which I do with Drew Taylor, which is about animation news. We have the Marvelous Disney podcast, which I do with Aaron Adams, about what's going on in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the shows that are in the works for Disney Plus. We have Universal Giant with Dustin Fuse, which is about the Universal Parks, and we have I Want That with Michelle Valladolid, and we're getting a new show for that up out of the ground. Michelle's recovering from some surgery, but we've got a holiday shopping guide coming up, which I'm going to make sure includes, again, this Paul Hirsch book, which I really just, so many great stories. Anyway, if you could do Dan and I a favor, if you could head on over to iTunes and rate and recommend both Coffee with Kenobi and the Pour Over and the other shows that Dan does. Likewise, the podcast we do here at Jim Hill Media, that helps get us eyeballs, extra ears. If on the other hand, you really, really, really like what we do here, if you get over to Bandcamp and subscribe, well, that makes it possible for us to go to Barnes & Noble and buy books like this. But I guess for now, Dan, just want to wish you and yours a happy Thanksgiving. I understand. What, do you leave tomorrow to go to Chicago to collect your son? Or
I leave the day before Thanksgiving and then bring home that night, and then we're going to be hosting. We're going to have a good sized amount of people over at our house. Yeah, it's great stuff. Okay, have a happy and safe Thanksgiving to you, Jim, and everyone listening to everything on the Jim Hill Media Network.
And how do you top that? Okay, we're closing down now, folks. Thanks for listening. Have a happy holiday, and Dan and I will be back soon with a brand new show.